Hello, everyone. When I was 19 years old, I had a near death experience from an overdose, and I met this tsunami of energy. I called it God, and it replied back to me that its name was Geschichte, which I found out much later means history, story, narrative in German, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't die during that experience. I asked that my life be saved, and it was. And I said, whatever is asked of me after this, I will do. So I ended up surviving and then going through a lot of training, inner work training for the next couple decades, and started attuning more and more with this energy that I met until one day I was speaking to a group of friends and a subject came up that I guess Geschichte found to be interesting and a subject that they wanted to teach about. And I felt this massive energy enter my body and start speaking through me. So Geschichte says that they're the angelic realm and that they're here to help humanity evolve into a much kinder, more harmonious, more capable race.
Yeah. So thank you so much for explaining. And for this episode, it was really cool. We're also going to speak to Geschichte today because Angel is going to channel it. So could you maybe explain a little bit more how that goes, and maybe also tell a little bit about the song you kind of always start with?
Yeah. So part of my training was learning to attune, and part of that attunement was learning this song. It's not in English. I don't know what language it is. I was just in the woods one day for part of my training, and I was listening, and I could hear these beings singing this song. And so I memorized it. And now, anytime Geschichte is going to come through and speak, I sing this song first.
Okay.
That tell enough? Do you want me to say more about that?
No, I think it's also good to maybe for everyone who's listening to just experience it and for themselves when they listen to the song.
Okay.
Are you ready to already get started, or?
I am.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So everyone, you're just going to listen to the song, so you kind of understand and know what Angel's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Home, say, Savanata. Home, say, Savanata. Ooh, ooh, hey. Hasefnukum seiken Hasefnukum seiken Save no for say Satan hey Honote hey Honote He comforted. Ah, comforted. He comforted. Ah, hey, comforted. Ah, hey, comforted. Home for Sun Tien Kien Nu Home for San Tien Kien Nu Nyam Fortiet Nyam Fortiet Om For Nun San Tien Kien Nu. Hello, Sanne.
Hi, it's good to speak to you. And
You as well.
yeah, so what I really wanted to ask you more about, and especially if you could explain more about emotional alchemy, because I think it's kind of the core of a lot of your teaching. So could you maybe explain what it is and your perspective on emotional alchemy?
Absolutely. Well, we'd like to preface by saying that humanity is special because of your intense emotional range.
Mm-hmm.
And this emotional energy that you guys have is extremely powerful. It's so powerful that it has a direct effect on the way you experience your reality, the way that you all experience life. So when you don't know how to interact with your emotions in a way that they're not controlling you, then you are at a very weak place in regard to being able to navigate your life. Okay? It's really important to know what to do with emotional energy. It's really important to know how to transform emotional energy. And specifically, it's important to know how to take negative emotions and interact with them in such a way that you have the power to transform them into positive emotions. Because essentially, all emotion is one of the best ways to explain it is that negative emotion is a positive emotion in its infancy stage. Okay, so in every negative emotion, there is a diamond in the center, kind of thing. But you have to go swimming in it and understand it and interact with it in a certain series of steps in order to transform it into this diamond that's sitting in the center of it. Once you're able to do that, the ability to navigate life is improved more than you can imagine, because mostly all of life is an emotional journey. If you really think about your life, the majority of it is emotional. Even your memories are rooted in emotion. Even the way you see life is rooted in emotion. The way you think is rooted in emotion. So when you know how to interact with emotions in a way that you can use the energy of them for your benefit, your entire life changes. And because emotion has so much impact on your perception, when you're able to interact with emotions in a way where you can transform them, you also transform perspective. And when you transform perspective, everything changes. And anyone who has experienced a perspective shift knows that that's true. Yeah.
Yes.
In a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely confirm that from my own experience, that it completely changes your whole, I think, even perception on reality, especially when you're doing it for practicing over a longer period of time, so really with consistency. So how could we, like what you mentioned, interact with our emotions more?
Mhm.
So we
Well,
can transform them, like you just mentioned.
mhm. The first thing is to become aware of whatever the emotion is.
Mhm.
So when we work with people, we actually have to work with many for quite a while just on this first step, which is being able to become very present. And many people ask us, what does that mean? What does that mean to become present with an emotion? And ultimately, what it means is that no matter what it is that you're feeling, that you allow yourself to feel it, that you become the feeler and the observer at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can engage your awareness about what's happening. Because when you become present with an emotion, the first thing that happens is that it usually feels overwhelming, because you can feel it filling your whole body, you can feel it affecting your mind, you can feel it affecting the way you think. And if as soon as you become very present with that and you just hold with it instead of trying to escape it, because most people, when they feel an intense emotion, the first go-to is to try to escape it. The first go-to is to try to distract from it in some way. And what we're saying is, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Go into it, be fully present with it in order to understand it. The next thing is to not try to talk it out of where it is. Okay, so that's another thing that happens, is that as soon as you guys feel intense emotion, you try to talk the emotion out of its stance, basically. And what happens with that is the emotion has its own intelligence. Okay, so every human being has what we call an emotional field. And this field is highly intelligent and it's connected to all of the other fields. We say that there are 8 fields to a human being. This emotional field is connected to every single one of them. So, this aspect of you that you consider to be you, that tries to tell this emotion what to be, is only one facet of you. This whole emotional component of you is another facet of you. So, that means you've got 2 facets of each other arguing. And nothing good comes of that. And really what you want to happen is for this facet of you that doesn't want to have the emotion, you want it to harmonize with this component of you that's having the emotion. So what needs to occur is a special kind of fusion and dialogue and attempt at understanding that is not going to happen when there's judgment toward the emotion. So if there's some type of attitude toward the emotion of you shouldn't be here, these are all the reasons that you shouldn't be here, then that emotional component of you is never validated. And if the emotional component of you is not validated, it can't start to transform. You can't experience the diamond, so to speak. So the first thing that you need to do in that scenario is just accept that this is the emotion that's there and try to understand why. And to put on a shelf anything that's inappropriate, meaning whatever this emotion has to say to you, don't be in a place of judgment with it, just be in a place of receptivity with it. Why does it exist? There's some aspect of you that's experiencing life in this certain area differently than you think it should be experiencing life. But that doesn't mean that it's not experiencing it. See what we're saying? So, in a sense, you have to take on this kind of mindset that all of your emotions are these little kids living inside of you. And anyone who's had little children knows that when a child is having an intense emotional experience, you don't deal with that child by smacking it around and telling it that that's not how it's supposed to feel. One of the best ways to deal with an intense emotion with a child is to have immense compassion for the child, to go into a deep state of listening. Maybe not just listening to words, but listening to energy. And this is the same kind of thing that you've got to learn how to be able to do with yourself. That this observant component of you, or even if it's not observant, just this component of you that's in disagreement with the part of you having this emotional experience, you've got to train this aspect of you to be in a receptive state, to be able to really understand what this emotion is telling you. So we would say that's basically the second stage. Okay. What happens in that second stage when you're really in this place of receptivity and you're allowing this emotion to just express is it starts to calm down. The intensity starts to calm down. And as that intensity starts to calm down, you'll notice that your thoughts about it start to change. You start to understand it more. And as you understand it more, you judge it less. And as you understand it more, then you're able to engage in what we would consider to be problem solving or a solution oriented type mindset, where you're interacting with this emotion in terms of what is it that you need in order to feel better? What is it that you really need? Okay. So, do you need compassion? Do you need to express yourself? Do you need to there's a myriad of things. Do you understand what we're saying?
Yes.
But during this interaction, this part of you that's interacting with the emotion can start to understand, what do you need from me? What do you need from life in general to feel like you can safely start to move to a more comfortable place? And so the whole rest of the emotional alchemy is this part of problem solving. And we would, most of what we teach is we consistently teach human beings how to problem solve within themselves, because your emotional self and its interaction with your egoic self, your spiritual self, your thought self, it's this very complex dynamic that is confusing if you don't know how to interact with it. And if you don't learn how to problem solve within yourself, and you don't learn how to hear yourself honestly and be able to be in a place of non-judgment with yourself, then you can't engage in alchemy of any kind, really. But ultimately, there's this, all of you have this goal of what you want to feel like and what you want to be. And in order to achieve that goal, you have to know how to interact with your emotions. If you don't, you will be on a perpetual state of default, and your emotional self will be in a consistent state of reaction due to memories of your history, predominantly, and memories of other emotions, but essentially all memory. Okay. And we could spend a lot of time talking about that too. But it's really important to be able to interact with these components of yourself as though they are true aspects of you that deserve attention and validation. And if you cannot do that, you'll never be able to achieve this goal of, I want to become this. I want feel this way.
Yeah. So it's mainly about bringing those parts as opposing aspects, kind of bringing them together and fusing them, so you're more acting as a whole
Yeah,
instead of all these
that's what it,
different parts that are kind of acting from a state of separation, kind of.
yeah, human beings in the world today are extremely fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
There are many reasons for this, but
Yeah.
what you want to be able to teach yourselves is an ongoing integration. And emotional alchemy is basically the key to this integration. So the last part of the emotional alchemy that's really important is to understand what you want. So it's to understand where you're going. You know, most of humanity is not really thinking about that enough. Humanity will predominantly set goals and then just kind of leave them there. But the goals are too concrete, they're not abstract enough. They're not about how you want to feel. And so you guys end up all over the place because you don't even understand where you're going. So the point is also to realize that there is a place that you want to go, and you need to figure out what it is. And it needs to be in terms of, how do I want to feel? How do I want to feel about this person? For example, let's say you're having just an issue with a person. How do I want to feel about this person? What is the ultimate goal of my interaction with this human being? Okay, you have to know that in order to problem solve within an intense emotion. You have to know where you're going. It's like if you get in a car and you just start driving and you have nowhere to go, are you ever going to arrive? No. And the same thing happens with being able to transform emotions. So, what human beings need to get good at also is being able to ask themselves, how do I want to feel? Okay. Let's say I want to feel loved. I want to feel loved. Well, then you have to start investigating that emotional state. What does that feel like to be loved? What do I imagine that feels like? Maybe you're someone who's never felt loved, so you don't have a reference point. What do I think it would feel like? Well, I think it would feel like support. It would feel like I'm being held. It would feel like my needs matter. It would feel like, and do you see how it starts to create this emotional kind of anchor about where you're going? Okay. And so then when you start investigating this intense emotion of rejection, let's say, and you know that where you want to go is, I want to feel loved, then you've really got something to work with here, because you can distinctly feel, this is how I feel rejected. This is how I want to feel loved. Okay. Just that understanding in and of itself is going to tell you a lot about the people you're hanging around, the way you treat yourself,
Mm-hmm.
the situations you put up with. Do you see what we're saying? So the problem solving already starts when you just have these two places sitting here. But then when you go through the steps of what we're saying and you really start learning how to problem solve, then you really can learn how to turn these feelings of rejection into feelings of feeling loved, not only through the emotional alchemy itself, but through the way you interact in life. Because obviously, if you want to feel loved, then you need to interact in circumstances in a way that generates feeling loved. And what happens is, if you are not paying attention to this and your default setting is, I feel rejected, then you're actually going to interact in circumstances that keep repeating, I feel rejected, I feel rejected. You see?
Yes, I understand. So what if what I can also see a lot, like you mentioned before, that when people have experienced certain traumas or come from like a background where they haven't really experienced what like love, or like at least unconditional love, really feels like. What I've noticed a lot is that people can be even blocked off from actually being open and being able to receive love, but also other positive emotions like joy and pleasure. Um, so, what can you do to kind of open up more, so to actually allow yourself to receive these things, but also allow yourself to what is connected to it, to feel these emotions fully in your body without the resistance to it?
Well, it's somewhat of a long journey, to be quite honest. You know, we work with people consistently on this sort of thing,
Mm,
and when someone has a life where they're taught over and over from the time that they're tiny that they're rejected or they're unloved or they're completely inappropriate or they've just been constantly abused, then all of that memory, like we were saying,
mhm,
all of those experiences have made themselves into this pretty concrete expression. Okay. And so that concrete, basic concrete expression, in order to start experiencing something different, has to be broken down. And that process of breaking all of that down is painful.
mhm,
And it takes a lot of discipline and time deeply spent to this inner work that we're talking about, where you're really paying attention to what's going on and you're really being the listener that you always needed, in order to allow these aspects of you that feel like they can't allow anything in out of protection to feel like they can start softening. You're the first one that teaches yourself to soften. So this ability to start interacting with oneself in a very compassionate way is definitely step 1. Step 2 though is realizing what's in there. Realizing what are the beliefs that I have adopted through the ways that I've been treated. Do I feel worthy of someone's unconditional love? Do I feel worthy of that? You know, those are the types of questions that you have to be able to deeply ask yourself. You know, we have a student that's been studying with us for over 2 years,
mhm,
and she experienced a lot of abuse her entire life and has had these very thick walls, just almost impenetrable walls. And little by little, we've been helping her crash them down. But it finally came to a point where the main thing that she had to realize was that the at this point, because all of the external negativity is no longer around, there's nothing to blame externally anymore.
mhm,
The only abuse anymore that was happening was from herself, was from her own energy toward herself, her own thoughts toward herself, and that she was avoiding paying attention to what those were. Okay. And so it was a very painful process. We had to bring her into a place of awareness where she's actually realizing that the way I feel I am worthless because I can't do this, or I am worthless because I can't do this, or I am worthless because I don't deserve this. And it's this mess of nasty judgment and cruelty toward oneself that was adopted through the way she was treated. But that last step basically is to really get into that feeling of what it's like to be treated with cruelty from yourself and what it's like to be the one offering the cruelty at the same
mhm,
time, and to really be in both of those. And as soon as you start bringing awareness to that, deep awareness where you're really genuinely feeling all of that, the beautiful thing that happens is that you can't help but feel compassionate toward yourself,
mm,
because you realize, oh my gosh, I became my mother toward myself, or whatever.
yeah,
But I have perpetuated this cruelty toward myself with the energy I offer myself, with the intolerance I offer myself, with the judgment that I offer myself. And so usually when it gets to that, when you're talking about someone who can't allow something in, what's actually going on is whatever cruelty they experienced, they've now turned inward. And they're now experiencing that cruelty toward themselves, and they're not aware of it. They're still
Mm-hmm.
thinking or even blaming the past, but in fact, it's become the present. It's just become such a normal dialogue, a normal way of interacting with oneself that they can't see it. And the trick of it is that once that occurs, it's like there's that aspect, and usually it's more than one, it's many aspects, that believe that through this type of cruelty, what you're doing is protecting yourself from anyone else being able to do it. If I do it to myself first, I will already know how it feels. I will already be in a protected space. But what happens is you create a wall because the expectation is already happening. The response happens before anything's occurred. So even if someone is going to offer you love, you've already decided without realizing it that they're not to be trusted. So you can't let it in. So it has to be dealt with on this inner level. But all of the that needs to occur before that is figuring out it, what your outer world is like. How much are you engaging in, which is repeating that. And you have to be able to come to this place where you can really look around you and say, okay, nobody else is abusing me. Now what? But people who've been abused, if they continue to stay in those abusive surroundings, abusive atmospheres, then the confusion is too great and the programming is too strong that I have to keep these walls up in order to keep myself protected. So you really have to take someone through an entire process to where they take themselves out of these abusive circumstances so
Mm-hmm.
that they can come to a place where they're genuinely looking at only the abuse that they offer themselves and that they're safe to do that, because it's at that point that the walls can come down. Do you understand what we're saying?
Yes, it's definitely. So it's really becoming aware of what you would call an internal abuser. So,
After becoming aware of the external abuse.
okay, yeah. So first you become aware of the external abuse, but of course it can be that it's also more in the past. So, like you mentioned, it's not current. So, for example, it's in someone's childhood, but even though they've moved out of the house and they're no longer in an environment with their parents, they're still continuing to repeat the same patterns over and over again within themselves by saying the same or thinking the same things.
It's
Um,
that, and it's that usually people are choosing people that are similar to what they experienced, so
mhm.
they continue playing these things out
Yes.
and not realizing it. So when we're working with someone continuously like we have this one, we take them through, it takes years usually, to
Mhm.
where eventually they're out of all dysfunctional situations, that they've really learned how to put themselves into a safe environment. Okay, that has to happen first before they're safe enough to even do the deep inner work. Because when someone who's been abused lets those walls down, if they're not in a safe environment, that intelligent aspect of them that's guarding them isn't going to allow it to happen. See what we're saying?
Yes, because you first have to be in a safe environment. Otherwise, the chance that the pattern is repeated by the person that's now currently there is pretty big. So the protector aspect will not allow that to
Yeah.
happen. So kind of like sabotage with this process. But
Except it's
it's
not.
doing its, yeah, I just want to say, but it's doing it, it thinks it's doing it in your own best interest, which a lot of times it can actually be in your own best interest from the
That's right.
perspective of that aspect.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is kind of your view on self-sabotage? Because we hear it quite a lot, especially when creating something or working towards something. which you hear quite a lot. Is it like self-sabotage is a thing that prevents you from getting something or creating something? What is your perspective on that?
Our perspective is that self-sabotage is in the eyes of the aspect that's doing that, it's not sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
In the eyes of the aspect that's doing that, it's simply playing out the way it always has. And at some point in that person's life, it played out that way to protect them. And so this is why this inner work is so important, because if you don't realize that your environment is changing, that you have the power to change the environment, and then you have the power to change your response to any environment. If you're not aware of these things, then you will be acting on default. And so default is what everyone's calling self-sabotage. It just means that not enough awareness has been brought to this particular thing to problem solve itself out of it. Okay? So we would say usually it's not necessarily self-sabotage. It's
Mm-hmm.
just the immature stages of a healing process. It's a coping mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Yeah, and what do you think about we as humans? What can kind of sabotage like the healing process? Is that we tend to escape our emotions a lot, so escape the way we feel, especially when it comes to more painful emotions. So emotions that are more scary, even. Um, so why do you think that is? And what can you do if you become aware of your own escaping pattern?
The reason we think it's that way is because right now, the majority, and by majority we mean 99.9% of all of you, are not taught from the time you're little bitty how to properly handle your emotions. You were taught that you're taught that almost every emotion you have is inappropriate in some way. Children are even ridiculed for extreme happiness.
Mm.
So from a very early age, your society, your parents, different different settings teach you that emotions in general are inappropriate, and that if you really want to fit in and be accepted, you have to pretend like they don't exist.
Mm.
You have to you have to suppress them. You have to you have to pretend like they're not there. So that becomes a habit. And as that habit increases in its momentum, your skills in being able to have an emotion and go, okay, so this is the emotion I'm having. This is why I'm having it. This is what I can do about it. Yeah. Your problem solving abilities are not practiced from the time you're tiny. So eventually, what happens after you push these emotions down over and over and over again is, you're vibrational beings and emotions are vibrational, and you end up with this overload of all of these different emotions stored as memory within your being, within your field, and it's overwhelming. And what happens is when you have an experience that triggers this emotional, what would we call it, let's say you have an experience that triggers the anger that
Mm-hmm.
you haven't dealt with your whole life. Well, now you're not just experiencing the anger from this one event, you're experiencing the anger from everything you've ever experienced that relates to that vibrationally. And that is extremely overwhelming. And without the skill of knowing how to deal with that, of course, what are you going to do with it? You're going to want to push that away too. And so what happens is, what we've seen happens really amazing, is that human beings literally become, it's like they become completely split, where they're so disconnected from the emotions entirely that we can say something like, there's a lot of anger that you got to get in touch with. And the person will say, what? I don't have any anger. I'm not an angry person. I don't have anger. And they're so disconnected from what we can, you know, the way we see is different than the way you guys see. So we
Mm-hmm.
can see all of the anger, and it's like sitting in a yellow room and saying, "What? This room isn't yellow. This room is pink."
Mm-hmm.
And that's the amount of denial that you end up in. And so then you're having to not only learn how to deal with this overwhelming emotion that's just piling on, but you also have to deal with waking up from this extreme state of denial. So the healing process for most human beings is quite intense
Yeah.
because of these reasons.
Yeah. So what you mean is like that someone is actually really angry, but it's kind of happening in their subconscious, so they're not aware of it. So then for them in that moment, it's like it's not there because they cannot see it, feel it, and experience it because it's kind of hidden from them.
Yeah, it's hidden. And because they've trained themselves to not pay attention to that particular emotion. Maybe they grew up in a household where the father was really angry and they hated seeing that. And
Mm-hmm.
they saw how much harm it did to their mother and how much harm it did to themselves. And so they decided, if I have anger, I'm not going to feel it. I'm not going to do anything with it. That's just not an okay emotion to have. And so the mind is powerful. And so what happens is anything then that comes in that creates this anger response is immediately put over into this closet. And at some point, the person forgets they ever created the closet in the first place. And so the closet's there, filled with all kinds of skeletons, and they don't even know it exists. And so then a protective mechanism is built around that goes, I don't know how to deal with that emotion. I don't approve of that emotion. And there's no way I'm letting it out because if I let it out, it'll destroy me. I don't know what I'll become. And so then there's a whole nother type of intelligence around it, which says, no way, that's never coming out. And so when we start working with people that have this type of, it's a momentum that occurs. You know, you're intelligent beings, and it's not just how you think, it's that all these different components of you have intelligence, and they're figuring out how to interact with life and how to survive through your whole life. And you're not tracking all of that. You can't. You're not tracking all of that. You're not tracking how many times your heart beats. There's a lot that's happening that you're not tracking. And in order to get back into that, in order to really become this whole person who has a lot of personal control, real control, not fake control, but true self-control. It's not through actually controlling anything. It's through true interaction. And there's a whole process of getting to that place that's extremely messy and difficult because all of you have these closets. And the integration process at this point in time is quite intense and difficult. Does that all make sense?
Yes, it definitely makes sense because I'm someone that can really suppress anger a lot. But like you mentioned, like not a way, this is like a conscious way, or you feel anger come up and you push it down, but more in a, like I said, more in a hidden way. So I know because I've done emotional work that I suppress anger because I'm rarely ever angry, you know? So it's like, um, then it's really, like you said, like really, really hidden because then it cannot even come up or show up. But it's still, like you said, it's still like in your body. Those vibrations and all these things are still there. So what can you kind of do to get more in touch with that emotion?
We would say figure out things that make you feel anger
Mm-hmm.
and don't try to avoid them. So we know that our teachings are unorthodox in this sort of way, but
Mhm.
when you come to the realization of, I can't feel anger, we would say start paying attention to things that make you lean toward anger, or when you start to feel that type of anger energy, go into it more, like sit in it and allow it to start coming forth and explore it. So don't walk away from the things that piss you off. Walk into them. We know that there are some for you. Yeah. There are
Yeah,
things you can see that
I
are
think there
happening
are
on
a
this
lot.
planet. Yeah,
I think there are a lot of things that make me angry because I'm also aware of like when we feel extreme anger, it's like really this call and this need for something to change,
that's right.
right? So, for example, on a personal level, but I think especially on a global level, there are a lot of things that make me angry. For
Yes.
example, I don't even watch the news and things like that because I know it makes me angry.
Yeah.
Um, for a lot of different ways. So not just the news itself, but more, yeah, also kind of more the limited perspective. It's something that can make me. And so when I look at most things, and especially, for example, for me, more around healthcare and therapy, there are a lot of things, especially mental health and physical, that make me angry. But what I've always said is like, I can focus on that, what we call like negativity. But what I think is also always subconscious with me is, yeah, but what do I get out of that? If I just get angry, like I can just, I think that's what we learn a lot. Just focus on a positive, and I think that's what can prevent me from feeling that more.
Yeah. The issue with only focusing on what's positive
Mhm.
is you live in a world where everything's not positive. And you live in a world where things need to change.
Yeah.
Many things need to change. And those of you who are willing to be a part of changing it, you have to look at the stuff that makes you upset in order to understand what you can do to help change it. And so a lot of the problems in your world are actually because of the mindset of I don't want to look at anything that upsets me.
Mhm.
And what has happened is, especially in the spiritual movements, there's so many spiritual people who consider that to be spiritual means to only look at something positive. And yet you guys are the ones who are actually interested in transforming energy.
Mhm.
And so if you're looking at something and you realize the energy of this is complete shit, then it's best to go ahead and sit in that and realize, why is this energy shit? And what can I do on all different levels to start transforming this? If this is where it is, what do I want? What would I like to see this as? What does that feel like? What are the things that I can emit? What are the things that I can do regarding educating? What are the things that I can interact with to start seeing this change? Do you see what we're saying? And
Yes.
so if everyone who is interested in transforming energy, if anyone everyone who is interested in really creating an empowered, harmonious world would actually look at the stuff that's upsetting, a lot more would get done. Because when you engage anger, you have momentum. Anger is a special energy that allows things to have a propeller if you know how to utilize it. Okay? A lot of energy can come from anger. You can get a lot done with anger as long as you're pointing it in the direction of, this is where I want to go with this. Then you don't feel powerless in it. What we consider is that most people don't want to look at things that make them angry because they feel powerless.
Mm.
But the thing is that there's really nothing in your world that you guys are powerless regarding. You have power in all different types of areas. But when you don't look at something altogether, you have no power. So that's the entire illusion of, I just won't look at what angers me, or I just won't look at what upsets me, But what happens when you refuse to look at it is you have no power. What happens when you look at it and you have an emotion about it? You have momentum, you have a propeller on how to take this energy and move it with you somewhere. You see what we're saying?
Yes.
So it's actually more useful to understand emotional alchemy, interact with it on a global scale. Do that. Absolutely do that.
Mm-hmm.
The more of you that can do that, the faster you're going to see this world change. And that's why it's one of the main focuses with our teachings, is because we know the truth. You cannot escape any of this energy. All of this energy is one. Okay? So if you want to experience a truly harmonious world, if you want to truly experience heaven on earth, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
then you have to get into this nasty energy and you have to transform it, because it's not going anywhere. It's always going to be there. It's just in what state is it going to be? If you can learn how to transform energy, then you can take all of it and turn it into something else. You see what we're saying?
Yes, definitely. And I do truly believe that anger is a very actually powerful emotion when it's channeled in the right way. Like you said, with like an intention behind it, with a direction. But what I think the thing is that I always fear is that it becomes destructive. So that and I think that's the reason, for example, why I think on a personal level, the reason why I'm not that in touch with my anger, so more in relationship with people, is because I don't want to hurt someone. And I think I personally, and I think a lot of people who are resistant to feeling angry, and I think a lot of people, especially also with more experience in emotional alchemy, have that as well. They can be comfortable around a lot of emotions, but anger can be a big trigger. And what I kind of realized in that it kind of, that suppression can also lead to a lot of anxiety as well, because you're suppressing a lot of emotion. But how is it, so when you really have the belief, so that it's really anchored within you, that anger, it hurts, so when you're angry you hurt other people, so how could you possibly shift or change that?
Well, that's why it's important to really start being able to just in your own setting be able to feel anger, so
Mhm.
that you can become more used to the way it feels. Because someone who holds awareness with it is still going to be able to have control within it.
Mhm.
Okay? It's the ones who don't hold awareness with it that the emotion hits and they're berserk, because they're acting out of default. They're not acting out of presence. So one of the first assignments we give to those who are having a difficult time dealing with anger, or are afraid they're going to hurt someone when they feel angry, is when you feel the anger come forth, just say, I need to be alone. Okay?
Mhm.
And so go by yourself and don't push the anger down. Let it start coming forth. Writing is really good, so that you can start organizing how you feel about things. Ask yourself, why do I feel angry? Why? And
Mhm.
make sure that you're making nothing inappropriate. You can say whatever you want in these self sessions.
Mhm.
Why am I angry? What did this person do that made me feel angry? Is it all about this person? Or do I have other things inside of me that are being plucked in relation to what this person did? You know, meaning, if your boyfriend says something to you and you start to analyze it because you're angry about it, if you analyze it deep enough, are you also going to realize that it's something that your father, it's an energy that your father placed on you too? And so when your boyfriend said it to you, it just made you feel all those feelings again from your father. Yeah. So you start organizing what you're feeling, just so that you can understand yourself. After you have a good comprehension of what you're going through, then you assess, okay, what of this needs to be said back to this individual to problem solve this dynamic? What can this person do to help me heal in this way? Okay. Then, when you go back and you talk to that individual, you're coming from a much more neutral place. You're actually coming from an observant place.
Mhm.
I spent time with myself in this regard. When you said this, I had this reaction. I realized 30% of it was actually about you, and 60% of it was about my dad, and 10% of it was about this bully in school. Whatever.
Mhm.
And you say, I really am working on healing this aspect of myself. Okay. But what I need from you is I need you to speak more gently. I need you, whatever it is,
Mhm.
communicate it. And if you have someone who's truly interested in a healthy relationship, then they will have a very good response to that. If you have someone who's not interested in a healthy relationship, then they won't have a good response to that. And so through this process, you start realizing also who you actually want in your life, because you start to realize that there are teammates and then there are people who are just not interested in being teammates. And as you engage in this type of love for yourself, it's really what this is, you naturally start to choose people who are also interested in having love for you and themselves. And so you can create very harmonious relationships like this. And that's the main way we would deal with anger in regard to hurting others. When you feel yourself explode with it, keep your mouth shut. Unless it's a very threatening situation. Unless we give a scale of 1 to 10. If it's 8 to 10, then you need to do something right there in that minute. If it's 7 to 5, give it give it an hour. If it's 5 to 3, give it a couple days. If it's 3 to 1,
Or
go deal with it
even
on
a
your own.
couple of days in between the
Yeah,
communication with the other person.
yeah.
Okay. So because why like that long period of time? Because I think we're used to what like the concept you just mentioned. We're used to, oh, you're just going for like away or for a walk for an hour or just in a separate room and then you come back. But you're actually suggesting a longer period of time. Uh,
Sometimes, yeah, because sometimes what you'll find is that whatever happened actually has nothing to do with that individual. It's all inner
mhm,
work. And when that occurs, you want to make sure that you've assessed that, so that you're not constantly spilling onto somebody else if it's just something that you need to take care of. And if you give that's why we have that scale,
mhm,
because if it's up there at the top, that's not going to be the case usually. But if it's in these lower numbers, often it's not even about that individual. And so the goal is actually for you to be able to figure that kind of thing out. And what happens is you start to trust yourself. When you act according to this scale, let's say, then the message that you continually send back to you is, every time I'm angry, I can trust myself to be angry, analyze the anger, address the anger, and improve my life because of it. When that is what your programming then becomes regarding anger, it's not an intimidating emotion anymore.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's really, really great advice. So we already went to, I think it's nice that we really went anger and really went into how kind of the process of emotional alchemy can work. I know that you also are going to start a course really soon. It's really going to go into emotional alchemy. Could you maybe give her a quick explanation about it for people who might be interested in having like you and really being guided through the process? I think definitely for people who are also new but more experienced, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, so it's a 6-week course, and the benefit is instead of just hearing us say it like we are in this scenario where
Hmm.
you're trying to navigate it all yourself, we help. And we're absolute experts at helping you guys transform emotions and really learn how to become adept at that skill yourself. So you're not alone in the process. And it's actually quite important because since none of you have really grown up with anyone teaching you how to deal with your emotions, you really do need teachers for a while in
Mm-hmm.
order to start a new habit with yourselves. And that's what we provide. So you come into our class, talk about whatever you want, and we help you get to the root of it. We help you transform it. We teach you how to hold emotional states. We teach you how to transform negative emotional states. We teach you how to problem solve within these states, how to think while you're in the midst of intense emotion. That's another skill, is how to actually think while you're in the midst of it. It's very it's a very important course. And from our perspective, it's this particular skill is what will save the human race.
So I really, really want to thank you for sharing and really being open and helpful about all these subjects. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I really, really want to thank you. Yeah, for today.
And thank you, Sana, for having us on again. You're always a pleasure to speak with.